What's up, guys? This is Jan for Chess24. I'm back with a little update on the Women's World Championship match, where they have played game number 6 by now, and that's the game we're gonna study in this video. The match between the Women's World Champion Mariya Muzychuk and the world number 1 Hou Yifan, who is the favorite and has been leading so far. She's up 3-2 before this game number 6. However, the last 2 games, while not very eventful, were an uptrend for Mariya Muzychuk. She was black in both of those and held the draw quite comfortably, showing very good opening preparation. So game number 6 has Muzychuk with the white pieces again, and it could be a bit of a turning point in the match if Muzychuk can keep the momentum and win a game, or if Hou Yifan can jump to a big lead should she win this one. Muzychuk goes for 1 e4, just as she did in the first game. In the third game she varied and tried d4, but she's back to discussing the Italian game, because Hou Yifan sees no reason to deviate and plays what she played in the first game as well. e5, knight c6, does not dare or feel like entering the Sicilian with 1 c5. So we get another discussion of the very quiet Italian. So far, the players are following their first game, and here after d3, d6, c3, Hou Yifan decides to castle, which is a little double-edged. It's a perfectly playable move, but most players prefer to avoid this pin after castles with bishop g5 and starting with a6, or even h6 is sometimes seen, just not to enter this territory. After castles, this time around, Muzychuk goes for bishop to g5. The, in my opinion, critical move, pinning the knight. However, this is a little double-edged. In order to break this pin, black has to play h6 followed by g5, weakening her king, but at the same time chasing the white bishop to a not very promising square on g3. That's what happens in the game after h6, bishop h4, g5. Muzychuk played bishop g3. One reason why I'm always a little wary about entering this is that I think knight takes g5 is quite interesting here. I'm not claiming it's winning, so don't get too excited, Mariya Muzychuk team. I'm sure you're studying all my videos. But I always thought it was interesting. There were a lot of random arrows. In general, white gets 2 pawns for the piece. The black king is open, and black still has to orchestrate a way to break this pin along this diagonal. Typical move is to play king g7, preparing ideas with rook h8 and maybe rook h5, just overprotecting this knight, when I'm not aware of a way for white to win directly here. Most normal move is queen f3, adding some more pressure on the f6 knight when black has a choice between moves like rook h8. Sometimes you can even contemplate king g6, even though here that wouldn't be very clever. And trying to break the pin with bishop e6. It's a very complicated situation which deserves more analysis. Computers say black is fine, as they tend to, but I do think it's a more promising try than practice indicates. Another move could be knight a3 here, a move we will see later in the game in a very different situation, but a very typical route for this knight here as well. The one thing you shouldn't do, even though it looks tempting, is to go king h1 to prepare f4, because that runs into rook h8, all of a sudden targeting the h2 pawn, and if white follows through with f4, black has not one, but 2 winning moves. The pretty one is the one move rook takes h2 check, king h2, queen h8, forcing king g3, and after e takes f4, this king will not make it out without significant losses. For example, king takes f4, queen h2, g3, knight h5 check, king f3, and knight e5 checkmate. No, not forced at all, just to give you some entertaining lines. None of this happened in the game because Muzychuk played the move bishop to g3 very quickly. This position is still known to theory, even though it hasn't happened that often. And most of the time, black plays the move bishop g4 here, preparing knight to h5 and also just introducing her own little pin, which is not so easy for white to break. Typically, white goes h3, bishop h5, and now something like knight bd2. When the play is very complicated, I would say probably roughly equal. One black plan is to go bishop g6, followed by knight h5, then somewhere down the stretch prepare f5 if possible. But of course black has to be very careful with her weakened kingside. Hou Hou Yifan decides on a very different way of playing, which is very interesting. Very direct, the move g4 here, weakening her pawn structure further and therewith her king, but preparing the move knight to h5 in order to fight against this bishop ASAP. Muzychuk chose the most logical move, knight to h4, eyeing the f5 square and in some lines the g6 square. There were some alternatives. The obvious one is knight fd2, saying this knight on the rim I don't really trust, I want to keep it in the center, when I believe black is fine after knight h5, but would still lead to a very complex struggle. Another one is the cute move bishop h4, but that's a move I believe Muzychuk didn't even consider because it more or less forces a draw. Black has to take on f3, and then after queen takes, once again this knight is under attack, only move is king g7, and here white has nothing better than repeating moves with queen g3 check, king anywhere, queen f3 back, attacking once again, and so on and so forth with the move repetition. So that wasn't going to happen since Muzychuk is trailing in the match. She wants to win this game. She goes for the most complicated move, knight h4. Black idea was to do the same thing, knight h5, fight against this bishop and also clear the very nice g5 square for her queen. White goes a4. This is a maneuver we've seen more and more in this structure. It carries a rather primitive threat to win this bishop by b4 and a5, which of course is parried with the move a6. And now we see the real idea, the move knight to a3. Same would have happened after a5 instead of a6. And this knight is trying to make it to the e3 square, which is a plan that's well known, but previously, more often than not, the way to get here was knight bd2 or knight d2, rook e1, knight f1 and knight e3. But with choosing the a3 route, is it route or route? I never know. Let's say route. White saves like half a tempo on the move rook e1 because it's not needed to clear that square. So it's a micro improvement that we've seen more and more recently. Queen g5, part of the black plan. No reason to take on g3 just yet. Knight to c2. And another very logical move, the move bishop to a7, because it's important for black to step out of d4 or b4 with tempo, and it's annoying to have to consider this every move, so bishop a7 is a perfectly normal move in these structures. Muzychuk decides to up the ante, goes knight to e3 here, not forced, offering a pawn. She could have played some random move like queen e2 or b4, but knight e3 looks very critical and very logical, targeting all these key squares and daring black to take this pawn, which Hou Yifan didn't do, and I fully understand why. After f takes e, if you take immediately, this bishop stays alive, which is no good. So if she were to take this pawn, she would have to exchange here first. Queen e3, then go king h2. When black is a pawn up with a good structure, but we see all the white pieces springing into life, and I fully understand that the highest rated women player in the world did not like this position. After, let's say, queen g5, queen b3, attacking the f7 pawn, knight d8, rook f2, planning to double on the f-file. All white pieces operate at max capacity, so yeah, it's just not a good position for black. Therefore, Hou Yifan played a very logical move, knight e7, covering the key f5 and d5 squares and asking white what she wants to do next. Muzychuk immediately decided to increase the tension even further by playing the move d4, which objectively I think was not a good move, even though it wasn't punished in the game. Objectively, white should probably have played the more humble rook e1 now, covering the knight on e3 just in case, and then follow up with d4 at a better moment. The problem with d4 is that it allowed a forced sequence, which I believe would have shifted the odds in black's favor. Knight takes g3, e takes g, h takes g, e4, cd4, this is the key, and now the move queen to g7, targeting the d4 pawn, which lacks a good way to defend itself. Giving up the center and then playing queen g7 is not the most natural sequence in the world, but would have been very strong here. If white plays d5, she frees the black bishop and blocks her own bishop, so it's a very undesirable move to make. Black could get greedy and take on e3 and then b2, but what I like even better is the move f5, solving the problem of this f5 square once and for all. And after e takes f, knight takes f5, I don't think white has anything better than this. black is slightly better because her bishop is much more active than the white bishop. Actually, black is more than slightly better. Black is seriously better here. So this would have posed some problems. Knight c2 also wouldn't have helped because of knight c6, once again targeting the pawn, and d5. Knight e5 is even worse. f5 still to follow. And therefore, Hou Yifan could have seized the initiative in the game here by going for this. Instead, she played queen g7 directly, reluctant to give up the tension, both with knight g3 and with e takes d4. But that, of course, is very different because now white has the added option of going d takes e5, which was played in the game. Hou Yifan recaptured. Knight takes g3 was possible with the idea after h takes g to take on e5 with the queen. But even this position I'm not so sure about. And after knight takes g3, there is also the added option of going e takes d6, when after some weird both sides take everything they can line, I believe white emerges with a dangerous initiative as well. Something like this. And once again, the black king is very vulnerable to ideas like queen b3 followed by rook f1. So not to be recommended. Therefore, Hou Yifan just went d takes e5. But now she's slightly worse. The d-file has opened, which is in white's favor. And the position is just a little harder to play because of the weaknesses around the black king, as usual. Muzychuk forces the issue. Once again, she's been forcing the issue all over the place with the move knight ef5, which I'm also not sure about. It's an interesting move, but you could also make a case for more neutral move like queen to d3, preparing rook d1, or the always useful, I'm going to mention this like 10 more times, a5 is always a useful move to fix the b7 pawn and gain some space on the queen side. Set knight ef5 was played, forcing some exchanges, and it's not so clear, at least to me, who benefits from these exchanges. Hou Yifan took with the bishop, which is logical because after knight takes f5, e takes f5, this bishop would look a little sad. So she instead took bishop takes f5, and Muzychuk went e takes f5. Knight takes f5 is less committal, exchanging this knight, but also wouldn't pose black a lot of problems after e takes, knight takes, e takes, knight takes g3, hg. Now, for example, e4, preparing e3. Black always has enough counterplay and does not have any problems. Therefore, e takes f5 is the correct move. And here we reach our next crisis in a very weird situation. Hou Yifan commits a serious error. What she should have done is knight takes g3, getting rid of this bishop, h takes g, and now the tricky move knight to c8. Not an easy move to spot, but very logical, planning to transfer this knight to the d6 square, where it blocks the d-file and is just much better placed than on e7. There was one tactical line which maybe scared Hou Yifan away from this. After queen d7, knight d6, queen takes c7, she would have to spot the move bishop to b8, which wins a piece for a couple pawns. After queen c5, rook c8, white loses bishop. She would still have some play after bishop f7, but nothing to be afraid of. Instead, Hou Yifan played the move bishop to c5 in the game, which is also logical. This bishop is directed towards d6 to once again block the d-file and cover the e5 pawn. But it has a tactical flaw, which Muzychuk did not exploit here. She could have gone for the move f6, which would have been very strong. Making use of the fact that this bishop is still alive, so knight takes f6 runs into bishop takes e5, when white is more or less winning. This bishop all of a sudden controls the board, can't do it, therefore black would have to take with the queen, but that drops the g4 pawn, and after queen takes g4, queen to g5, let's say queen f3. White has a serious initiative, because once again, the black king is weak, and the white pieces are doing very well here. b7 is under attack. There's a lot of natural moves to increase the pressure, like rook a1, so Hou Yifan would have had to suffer here. Instead, Muzychuk went for rook e1, also a natural move, but a lot less forcing, and Hou Yifan took the chance to finally eliminate this bishop before it does any damage. H takes g, and the move king to h8, anticipating this f6 queen takes g4 idea, getting the king out of trouble, also maybe directed against the potential knight g6, which could have been a nuisance in some lines. The alternative was to just play h5 to reinforce the g4 pawn, and also defending against f6, when maybe white is slightly better, but I don't think black's position is too troublesome. King h8, same thing. Now f6 doesn't work because after queen f6, f2 is on prise. So Muzychuk instead played the very natural queen e2, attacking this pawn and forcing this bishop to a more passive square with bishop d6. Now once again, she rejects the move f6, which I think would still have been her best bet, exchanging the f-pawn for the black g-pawn, freeing this square for the knight, so it's no longer caught offside. In this position, I don't think it's clear. I think black is in not too much trouble, something like queen g7, queen h5, f5. But if anybody's better here, it is white, because once again, king safety is the main factor, with piece activity being around equal. So Muzychuk should have gone for that. Instead she played queen to e4, taking this pawn, rook b8. Now last chance to go f6, go for this trade. But instead she starts losing the thread around here and produces a couple of moves that, yeah, are not great mistakes by themselves, but somehow really let the momentum go. The first one of those is the move bishop e2, attacking g4. That's in black's interest to play h5 and reinforce that guy anyway, so I'm sure Hou Yifan was happy to see that, and this bishop on e2 doesn't really do all that much. Next move, rook ad1, also a natural move, but it doesn't contribute very much. It's more logical to still play a move like a5, grabbing some space and fixing the b7 pawn. Or even to admit your mistake and go back to c4 with the bishop. Rook ad1, and a very strong but easy maneuver by Hou Yifan, the move knight to g8. It's headed for its ideal square, the f6 square, where it controls central squares, defends h5 and g4, and prepares the push e5, e4. And yeah, the momentum really starts to shift here. One more inaccuracy by Mariya Muzychuk on the next move, king to h2. That really shows that she lost the thread. This is not just a loss of a tempo, but it's counterproductive, because this king will be in some trouble on this diagonal, so it's much better off on g1. Instead, what she should have played is maybe a move like queen e3, anticipating knight f6 and also stopping queen to g5. After king h2, Hou Yifan played strongly. She first played queen g5, knowing that knight f6 would not run away and not allowing queen e3 in reply. And now, yeah, the momentum really has turned. Next move is bishop back to c4, sort of admitting something has gone wrong. I believe it was already time for the emergency break here to play f6, give up a pawn, clear the f5 square and fight for a draw after knight takes f6, queen f5. White should still have reasonable drawing chances with the opposite colored bishops and this knight back to life. But of course, not what you're dreaming of. Instead bishop c4, but now knight f6, black has an ideal setups and white's problems are very serious. After queen e2, black would play e4, and as I mentioned earlier, the king on h2 is not very well placed because there's a threat of queen takes h4 check. Therefore, Muzychuk went for the endgame, queen e3, but here, after queen takes e3, I'm sure Hou Yifan was happy to exchange that. The black king can never ever be in trouble anymore, so the problem of the exposed black king has disappeared. What has not disappeared is the problem of this knight not having any squares, and this is a very serious factor now that it can't be bailed out by f5, f6. Black is already seriously better in this endgame because of this knight on the rim. There's many ways to play it. Hou Yifan went for the very natural e5, e4. You could make a case for other moves like b5 or king g7. Black holds a nice advantage in either case, but e5, e4, very logical, frame this bishop. Rook e2, once again, an admission, things are not well, but not a move to be criticized, just stepping out of potential bishop c5s. Rook bd8, once again, you could make a case for many different moves, but this one is fine. She's trying to centralize her rooks, either double them on the d file or on the e file, putting them to work. Bishop to b3, rook to d7, and f3. That's maybe panic. It's probably a mistake objectively, but it's hard to sit and wait because, yeah, there's really no constructive plan for white here, while black has countless moves to improve her position. King g7, rook e7, rook e8, king h6, king g5, and one day or another, e4, e3 will be looming. Black can also grab some extra space on the queen side. Sorry. So it's just a very unpleasant position, and I understand that Muzychuk tries to break free, do something for her knight with f3. The problem is it doesn't really threaten all that much. After rook e8, f takes g doesn't help because after hg, The knight is still trapped, and we've only weakened the g3 pawn. Fe also doesn't really work, because after knight e4, this point collapses, or rook e4 might be even stronger. So you can't really do anything. And Muzychuk went rook e1, trying to get a commitment from either of these pawns, but Hou Yifan just keeps the tension with rook to e7, and the white position has not improved because, yeah, as mentioned, fg or fe don't help. f4 buries this knight for good, so also not an improvement. Therefore, very hard for white to do anything, while black still has countless small improvements like king g7. What Muzychuk should have played here is a move bishop c4, maintaining the status quo by defending this rook, defending against immediate threats. But instead she played a move that is in a way more logical, bishop c2, trying to put more pressure on the z4 pawn to force it to commit to something. But the problem is it loses by force. Hou Yifan, who of course is a great tactician, spots her chance here and goes for it. The trick is e takes f3. Now rook e7 is forced because this rook was under attack. Rook takes e7. Now this rook is under attack, so rook e7 is once again forced. And what Muzychuk was probably hoping for is bishop e7, gf3, when white is still worse, but the position looks defensible. This knight might have a way out finally. But there is a small detail. I'm not sure if this is the small detail she missed or if it's later in this line. I must admit I didn't see the press conference, but there is a little move f2 which Hou Yifan played reasonably quickly, and that's a powerful move. Threatening f1 queen obviously, stopping rook e1, controlling that square, stopping king g1 because it's also controlling this square. And if white were to stop this pawn with bishop d3, now black can just recapture on e7 with a completely winning position. Pawn up, and what a pawn. And also both the knight on h4 and the king on h2 are completely locked out of the game. Try to bring them back, it is impossible, so black would win this very easily by activating whatever she felt like, the king, bishop. It's just resigned here. Therefore, Muzychuk tried something else, and that's what I mentioned earlier. I'm not sure if this is the line she had based her hopes on. Maybe she even thought she was setting a trap with bishop to c2, provoking this f2, because at first sight this looks very dangerous for black. She has to go f1 queen, and here knight g6 check, king g8, all of this was played. At first sight it looks like bishop b3 might even win the game for white, because there is all kinds of rook moves threatened. And it's very hard to defend against those. So black only has one move that does not lose in this position. But the good news for black is that this move, bishop takes g3, wins on the spot. Because after king g3, knight e4 check, king h4 is met by queen h1 checkmate. While king h2 is met by mate in 2 with g3 and queen h1. So I'm not sure if this bishop g3 is what Muzychuk missed, or if she just missed f2. Either way, the game is decided here after knight g6, king g8. She tried rook takes f6, getting rid of this knight, but that does not prolong the fight for very long, because Hou Yifan met it with bishop c5, which threatens queen g1 checkmate, and that threat can't really be stopped. White would have a few spy checks, like bishop b3 check, king g7, rook f7 check, king h6, but those expire quickly, while this mate will be delivered. Therefore, after bishop to c5, the world champion Mariya Muzychuk decided to resign, and that means that she's now behind 4-2 in this match, which in a 10-game match is a very substantial lead for Hou Yifan, and it looks like Hou Yifan is well on her way of reclaiming the Women's World Championship title. As for the game, Muzychuk certainly had chances, very interesting opening phase, and then especially after bishop c5, this move f6 I believe would have led to a very unpleasant position for black, but instead here she missed her chance, and especially in this phase she started playing very undecisively. Should still have changed the structure with f6, but made a couple of small mistakes, and Hou Yifan really seized control by just doing better maneuvering here with queen g5, knight f6. And then it already was very, very hard to defend the white position. So 4-2 for Hou Yifan in her match against Mariya Muzychuk. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one or on chess24.com. Bye bye.